Because Your People Matter, a playbook for management excellence. Written and read by John Berry and Sue Berry. First published in hardback edition in December 2018. Second edition published in paperback and ebook in August 2020. Both published by Grosvenor House, Tolworth, UK. This third edition was recorded as 12 chapters in autumn 2022 and is available on YouTube. Chapter 1. Organising People. This book centres on a perfectly normal person who puts themselves forward as a manager of a firm. In the context here, a manager is someone who sits between the shareholders and other stakeholders and the employees who work in the firm. Put simply, the manager makes the firm work. Without someone in that position doing what the manager does in working with the employees, the firm would fail. This book explains how the manager should work with their employees. Section 1.1. About management. Management is an amalgam of many disciplines. At its core is psychology, the science of people and their behaviour. Psychology describes behaviour stemming from both conscious and unconscious thought, and those thoughts are driven by personal and group feelings, attitudes, beliefs, and values. All managers are psychologists. Each must continually strive to understand the thoughts of the people who work for them and consider what action they might take to influence those thoughts towards their point of view. Ultimately, managers want the people who work for them to behave in a particular way and to realize a particular work outcome. How people behave is further influenced by their personality, intelligence, knowledge, skills, experiences, preferences, resilience, relationships, motives, and physical and mental health. Since these personal characteristics are dependent entirely on the holder, the manager must therefore get the right person in the right job in the first place, and then manage them well. Management therefore begins at the firm's inception and continues daily thereafter, hiring people, motivating them, and dismissing them if things don't work out. In thinking about management, there are 4 approaches, and we describe these in the preface. As noted, we favour positivism. Positivism suggests that the manager can infer some causal relationship between an intervention that they might take in a person's life and their subsequent behaviour, performance, and personal outcome. There are many unknowns and many environmental and personal issues that might interfere in the relationship between variables. But nonetheless, without intervention, there is no management, and without management, there's no firm. Management is therefore first and foremost about intervention. Managers must also understand other disciplines, primarily law, economics, and politics, because those disciplines provide both opportunity and constrain those interventions. Management is therefore a complex science. It's practice done by a person who puts themselves forward for the role. It's a topic of study at university, with maybe 50,000 academics worldwide sharing research on topics from employee selection to well-being to employee commitment. There's much published about how to do it, and like science in general, society is understanding management better as time passes and new research is published. Management applies across all organizations, from the entrepreneur with a couple of employees and a few suppliers, to multinationals with thousands of managers and hundreds of thousands of employees and other workers. Many commentators focus their attention on the multinational end, or at least they assume that the manager to whom they talk is employing many. They assume that there are many layers of management and dedicated HR and OD professionals. We don't make that assumption. Our approaches and methods apply whatever the organization size, but we focus more on the SME, the small to medium-sized firm with between 10 and 250 employees. Overall, management is about outcomes and about the interventions to realize specific, considered, and desired outcomes. Finally, management is a practice comprising many techniques, approaches and tools. It's something that should work. It should be able to be done well by managers, but mostly it's something that's done badly. That would be okay if each manager was cocooned within an excellent support framework, but they're not. For the most part, managers are alone. The HR and OD and other support services available to managers, from trainers, coaches, mentors and consultants that might augment the manager's competencies, are woeful. And way too few would-be managers put themselves into training schemes. So there's work to be done by everyone who would manage. This book's a start. Many people, termed accidental managers, enter management without training and often without deliberate thought. Most who put themselves forward for management do so for one reason only, because they have a thirst for power. That power comes in two forms. Personalized power, or P-power, is the need to set and meet personal goals. Those high in P-power have a need to feed their own egos. They focus on the I, and they see that they're in competition with others in a zero-sum game in which they aim to win while others lose. Those high in P-power are the alphas. For them, success breeds success and an even greater need for personal enhancement to fuel that power. For them, success is the growing fiefdom, the enlarged sphere of domination, and the bigger I. Socialized power, S-power on the other hand, is the need to derive power through others and for others. It's the desire to use power for the wider benefit. Those high in S-power tend to put the needs of their organization above their own personal needs, something that is well established as a fundamental need of a good manager. There's a balance in each person. Some people are dominant in P-power. Research has found that those high in P-power do drive huge change, but often the resulting organization does not enjoy ongoing stability. Others are dominant in S-power. Those managers would build a coalition, a consensus for action, rather than giving an executive order. This balance between S-power and P-power is not a measure of competitiveness, though. Whilst women are typically higher in S-power than P-power, they're just as competitive as men, and people can be both highly competitive and dominant in S-power. It's just that in the S-power case, winning is done with others rather than over others. So everyone has both P and S. How each person behaves as a manager depends on which type is dominant. We refer throughout to the firm. We accept that this title is baggage and describes many forms of entity, so let's be clear. The firm in this context is any legal trading entity of any form that employs or intends to employ people. It may be a commercial firm in business to make a profit, and the profit motive is pervasive in this book, but the management activities we describe are substantially common in not-for-profits and governmental organizations, and for this reason we discuss multiple outcomes rather than singular profit as the result of business activity. We're agnostic about the form of firm. It could be a single entity in one place, or it could be a dispersed company across a country or across the world. It's simply an organization employing people that does something in pursuit of some aim. Whilst we focus on the manager as a single person responsible for making the firm work, we acknowledge that the manager will be aided by a senior team, a group of individuals who, together, provide all the personal characteristics, competencies, and behaviors needed. In microfirms, there's often only one manager. As the firm grows, the manager delegates more and more of their responsibilities until it's not one manager, but many. For simplicity and to retain focus, we still refer to the manager, even if they delegate to others. We therefore write for the most senior of senior managers, the first among equals, the managing director or chief executive officer. Equally, we write for all who manage others. If there was a single reason why firms succeed, there would likely be a single set of actions needed and management would be simple. But there is no single reason and management is complex. Summarizing though, firms usually succeed because the manager is successful in motivating the employees to do what they want. Motivation is a central theme, supported by a host of other activities and devices that describe the environment in which that motivation takes place. Since success comes from the ability of the manager to work with the employees, we refer throughout to the manager, the employees, and the firm as a collective of manager and employees. And we leave the reader to reflect on nuances that inevitably exist in specific cases. Those reflections are highlighted in each section. Here's the first. This reflection is about you, your firm, and your employees. Considering your firm, identify who your various stakeholders are. A stakeholder is anyone who has interest in the firm's success. Consider who put the money up to create the firm and what they, as shareholders, expect from you and the firm. And finally, think through what the employees want. Section 1.2. The basics of a firm. One of the necessary skills a manager must have is the ability to abstract, to draw back from the issue and understand its impact at the highest level. As a manager, if you don't master this skill early, you'll be quickly mired in detail. Figure 1.1 in the book shows a simplified or abstracted model of the firm that helps in this understanding, and I'll describe that now. The firm can be considered simply as a process machine, with inputs on the left that are processed by the machine, the firm, to yield outputs or outcomes on the right. Inputs are consumed. Money is significant, but it's an enabler, not an input. Investors put money up. That money buys technology and enables people to be hired. Those people then give their effort. That technology is put to work and gives function. And if the right people are hired and the right technology is acquired and the manager engenders the right culture within the machine, innovation will result. Innovation drives improvements in the process of creating the desirable outcomes. Enablers enter the machine from the top. Controls enter from the bottom. Enablers and controls are not inputs. They're not consumed by the machine, but they modify the machine's behavior. Enablers are things like the market in which the firm chooses to trade. Controls are things like government regulation with which the firm must comply. We've illustrated in the figure the outputs or outcomes as invoicing, satisfied customers, and deliverables. As manager, you will want to track those outcomes. Abstraction allows the manager to think about the firm in simple terms and to ask important questions about those inputs, enablers, controls, and outcomes in order to drive the firm's performance. Your firm will have unique inputs, outcomes, enablers, and controls determined by your strategy. And it follows that if you change the inputs for a given firm, you'll change the outcomes. And of course, if you change the nature of the firm as a processing machine, but keep the same inputs, you'll again change the outcomes. This idea of changing the various mechanisms, changing the inputs, enablers, and controls, and changing the firm itself to get a desired outcome from the machine is the essence of management. This theme will occur time and time again as we present the various concepts in the coming chapters. Investors put money into a firm and become shareholders. Since there's no certainty that the outcome that they realize will be the outcome they want, they take a risk. Investment is, by definition, a payment today in the hope of a greater payback tomorrow. It's a hope that could be dashed if the firm fails. But conversely, It's a hope that could be rewarded handsomely as the firm grows and pays dividends to those shareholders as the years go by. The flow of money in and out of the firm is a critical measure of the firm's health. If the machine is effective in its market, turnover will rise. If profits are realized, those surpluses are used as working capital and used to pay people for their effort and to buy more technology. And if the machine is ineffective, shareholders may have to invest more to avoid the firm running out of cash. Consumables are the raw material that goes to produce the goods or provide the services. They're purchased from suppliers and are a cost to the firm. On the one hand, they might be like coffee beans in a coffee shop, consumables, literally input to the machine. On the other hand, they might be cars in a motor dealership, bought from the manufacturer and sold on with other value-added services to realize the output of a satisfied customer, now able to drive for pleasure and work. Consumables are acted upon by the machine and turned into products and services or other outcomes. People and technology together form a capability, an ability for the person to do something, to do the processing. People can do little without technology. Technology itself is an enabler, but as soon as it starts work, it becomes an input through its function. Technology is, for example, the laptop computer used to create the manuscript for this book, or it's the coffee machine used by the barista in the coffee shop to create a cup of skinny latte. Technology affords workers capability, and the balance between human competence and technology function in achieving that capability is and always will be the subject of much management debate. People bring their competencies to the firm. It's what they can do with a given technology that makes them valuable and worth paying a wage. Given the right conditions, people behave in a certain way. Hopefully that's the way the manager wants them to behave, and hopefully this behavior realizes the desired outcomes and that their effort is effective. So at the highest level of abstraction, people are described by competencies and behaviors. Whilst this might seem a bit heartless, this abstraction to the lowest common denominator of human existence allows the manager to use the model in Figure 1.1 to determine change. If the manager changes those human characteristics, those competencies and behaviors, the outcomes will change. People are more complex than the simple description suggests, and this complexity gives rise to the need for managers to understand how to manage people to maximize human effectiveness through motivation. It also gives rise to the need for this book, and we deal with motivation at length in the coming chapters. You, as manager, are the change agent, the conductor of the orchestra of variables. You can change any of the variables, the inputs, the enablers, the controls, and the nature of the process machine itself, in order to change the outcomes. You sense the outcomes, the outputs from the machine. You act on each variable, and you look at what happens. If what you had hoped for doesn't happen, you do something else until you find the right combination of inputs, enablers, controls, and machine to give you what you want. In this much, you have complete control over the firm's destiny. In the early days of a firm, the founder is often the only person working in the machine. Typically, as the markets demand more and the production from the machine rises, the founder finds that demand exceeds their capability to supply, and they need to invest in people and technology. The first management action to increase the capability is typically to subcontract some of the work to others. The chair maker, for example, subcontracts production of chair legs. The garage mechanic will buy in ready reconditioned engines. As time passes and demand grows, the founder may find that subcontracting is inefficient, costing more than the bought item costs to make in-house. And so the founder will hire some people to make the items and some others to manage that activity. Ultimately, most firms are a mix of in-house production and subcontractor supplied parts. Evolution of the machine continues as the firm grows. The most obvious outcome for a commercial firm trading with customers in a market are turnover and profit. But this is seldom all that the manager monitors at the output of the machine. Typically, firms must operate efficiently, and so the manager will monitor productivity, the amount produced by the machine for given inputs. Similarly, they'll monitor quality and safety, because often such parameters are key to turnover and profit. Those outcomes will vary with time. Often, for example, firms see seasonal demand, and turnover stalls and profits plummet during holiday periods. And some firms will grow turnover and turn a profit within months of startup, whereas others will take several years. The online supermarket Ocado traded for over 10 years before reporting a profit. Its strategic aim was to build its machine, its technology and people ready for sale, rather than returning short-term dividends to the original founders. Your desirable business outcomes will be unique. As part of your strategy building, you must determine what they are in order to complete the high-level model of your firm. Now, as before, it's useful to reflect on what we've just said there. Specifically, thinking about the desirable outcomes. So now think through the inputs, enablers, and controls that impinge upon your firm. Think through the outcomes that you seek. Then think through the links between each of the inputs, enablers, and controls and those outcomes. So what sort of firm or machine do you need to process those inputs to outputs? And how might your model change with time? Section 1.3. Defining management. Management is many things to many people. Some consider the term management to describe a pedestrian activity of administration. This definition stems from the days when firms had many layers of management. It stems too from the military, where a commander had an adjutant, a left-hand man, someone who did the books and administered affairs, while the commander did the real business of delivering outcomes. Whatever management is, it needs definition before you can get on with the job and before you can talk to your peers about something you all understand. The manager's sphere of influence is ubiquitous. At an employee level, the manager's job spans from influencing the job they do through the technology they use to the outcomes they produce. In the book, figure 1.2 describes this graphically, and I'll describe that. Management is the exertion of influence over all aspects of the firm to achieve the desired outcomes. Here, we're interested in managing people, so we can redefine the manager's job as having influence over the jobs done, the job holders who do those jobs, the work environment, in turn driving job holder motivation as they do the job holder performance, considering their competencies, and the technology that job holders use to achieve the desired outcomes given the markets in which the firm trades. The first role that the manager must adopt is that of commander. Someone must think about the strategy and then do everything necessary to cause jobs to get done, and performance to be achieved and outcomes realized. In this sense, the manager is commander, metaphorically in complete command of the ship. As we shall learn later in the book, there are ways of making this happen, but the truth is that the manager elects themselves commander. They have agreed to take total responsibility for the firm and hence are in command of success or failure. They may choose not to ram home the point every day. They might delegate parts of that responsibility, but in the end, the buck stops with the manager. It's that acceptance of responsibility that differentiates the manager from others. Now, leadership is a narrow subset of management. Management has influence over all aspects of the firm. Leadership strictly is the influence over each employee's motivation. Since it's a significant issue in firms, we cover leadership in more depth in Chapter 2. Leaders can adopt directive and non-directive styles. A directive style is useful when the leader needs to take control, ignore what others think, and tell people what to do. Sometimes things must be done, and a directive style is essential. But it should be used sparingly. A non-directive style, on the other hand, is where the leader discusses the issues with the employee, and the employee elects to do what's needed as if they had thought of it. It's a subtler style. It takes more time in execution, but it is more effective overall. Leaders also can adopt a host of different approaches. A professional approach, leading by example, is valid when leading professionals like teachers and lawyers. In a transactional approach, the leader engages in exchange with the employee to get the employee to do what's needed. And using a transformational leadership approach, the leader sets out the vision and gets buy-in from those needed to make the vision happen. But more on those approaches later. Today, entrepreneurs are revered. But an entrepreneur is simply someone who realizes that within a given firm and market, it's possible to sell something for more than it costs to produce. The firm therefore makes a margin, and if the margin is more than the costs of the operation, profit will be made. In a sense, the entrepreneur is the commercial element of management, the sales department of the firm, if you like. A firm without an entrepreneur will fail. It will be a great machine without a purpose. Conversely, an entrepreneur without competence in management will have good ideas but no ability to realize them. So the truth is that the manager is commander, leader, and entrepreneur, and a whole lot more besides. But is there any alternative to management? Does someone always have to be a manager? And can the firm get the right outcomes without such a determined person at the helm? There is an academic research thread about alternatives to leadership, and there's some evidence that leadership itself, as a moderator of motivation, need not necessarily be concentrated in one person. It can be distributed. And certainly an entrepreneur can have great ideas and buy and sell to generate profit. But they can never do that on a large scale. It takes management of technology and people working together in a firm. So we contend that there is no alternative to management. So just taking that last point on a reflection, take a few minutes to consider the statement, there is no alternative to management. And as I've described it above and as described in section 1.3 of the book, do you agree, therefore, that there is no alternative to management? Section 1.4, differing roles. It's important to recognize that people, including the manager, play multiple and sometimes conflicting roles in a firm. Initially, of course, the manager plays all roles. As others join the manager, these roles are adopted by others, depending on the characteristics or role and the attributes of the person. There are 4 principal roles. Someone or some group of investors put up the money to start the firm. Each investor buys 1 or more shares in the firm, and hence this person or group of people are referred to as shareholders. Shareholders put up the financial stake, but unless they become directors, they take little other interest in the management of the firm and are of little interest to us here. Typically, shareholders will enter into a shareholders' agreement that describes the powers that they have over the activities of the firm. Their power is applied by appointing a director to the board of directors to act on their behalf. Generally, they can appoint themselves. Usually, only shareholders with more than a certain number of shares get to appoint a director. Those directors appointed by shareholders will register at the United Kingdom Companies House. In some countries, firms have two boards, a supervisory board and a management board. The supervisory board comprises the shareholding directors, while the management board are appointed for their management and technical skills. In SMEs in the UK, one board typically does both supervision and management. The board then elects one of its members as managing director, or MD, and it delegates the board's power to the MD in return for reports on progress. Typically, the whole board would be involved in the development of strategy, with each element of strategy forming a new objective for the MD. Suppliers are key players in the early evolution of the firm. Typically, the founder subcontracts part of their activity to suppliers until the business grows to such a point when hiring staff becomes possible. Those suppliers are typically other firms or sole traders and are often referred to as contractors, associates, freelancers, or subcontractors. Suppliers should be under business-to-business contracts with a firm for the supply of services. Those contracts, and the relationship in general, should clearly show that the supplier is a third party that supplies goods and services against a specification. Those suppliers must not come close and be able to be legally construed as employees. The firm and its suppliers are often considered to trade at arm's length, illustrated by the separation between them. This separation should be maintained. The distinction between workers or employees and suppliers is highlighted by this arm's length relationship. Every person associated with the firm should be under a contract. All people under a contract of service are workers. Some workers are employees, and the distinction between workers and employees is complicated. The distinction between suppliers with a contract for supply of services and those under contracts of service is an important one, and one that the manager must think about and understand. If the manager gets the right contracts in place with the right people from the outset, significant future problems are avoided. And we'll cover this in more depth in the book. The distinction between worker and employee is subtle. If you as manager gain the services of people through an intermediary, such as a staffing agency, the people who work for you are workers. And this is illustrated in the book in figure 1.3, where the intermediary invoices the firm and the intermediary pays the worker a wage. Then the worker is an employee of the intermediary. Now, if instead the firm pays the person a wage, the person is then an employee of the firm. And this is a simple definition. It gets more complex, and we'll discuss it again later. Firms often confuse roles and titles. Board members may also be members of the management team and attract the title director. This is a valid title if indeed they're registered as directors at Companies House, and sometimes the MD appoints employees as director as a title suggesting high rank. Many firms steal terms from the United States and call their MD the Chief Executive Officer or CEO. Then those directors representing shareholders or indeed employees appointed to high-sounding positions are termed the C-suite, with titles like Chief Financial Officer, CFO, Chief Operating Officer, COO. Managers should be careful when giving people titles. An inappropriate or misleading title can unintentionally imply superior responsibility and the right to commit the firm. So, for the rest of this book, those who exert influence over all aspects of the firm to achieve the desired outcome are termed manager or the manager. Those who do the manager's bidding are termed employees. Those who augment the firm's capabilities by supplying services are termed suppliers. There are only those three categories of persons supporting the firm. Throughout the book, we strive to acknowledge the differences between them. Section 1.5. Basic firm types and structures. Fundamentally, the type and structure of the firm will greatly influence the nature of the machine possible and the outcomes available. Today, there's a huge interest in unusual types and structures in an effort on the part of managers to minimize costs. Typically, if a firm can avoid having premises or can have a very small headquarters, this is highly attractive. This section discusses some of the options and some of the issues that arise through those options. People are social beings. Employees need one another for their existence, and, to a greater or lesser degree, they actively seek out contact with others. It's common for employees to say that one of the big things they get out of work is the social interaction, the camaraderie. Typically, employees socialize with other employees in and out of the work setting, and managers structure the firm in a particular way, and this structure enables a particular social interaction. Firms work because employees cooperate with one another, and firms work because managers are able, through social interaction, enabled by the firm structure, to influence their employees towards their point of view. You'll recall that this is one of the definitions of management, and specifically of leadership. So managers must create the right environment, and a major element of that environment is the firm's structure. If the structure constrains interaction, the machine will not function optimally, and if the manager will not achieve the desired outcomes. Figure 1.4 in the book shows three typical structures of small firms. In the diagram, EE are the employees, and MGR, manager, are the manager, or managers. In one case, there's more than one manager. And I'll describe here figure 1.4. The first and most obvious structure is that of the nuclear firm. Manager and employees are co-located. Here the manager will find it relatively simple to make their influence felt. The manager will see each employee daily and hence monitor work output and will command and facilitate. Here, calling a meeting, for example, is simple and issues can be dealt with immediately. And the proximity of all players enables trust to be built easily between them. Soon after the manager has formed a nuclear firm, evolution typically demands recruitment of employees physically dispersed from the firm. Sometimes this will be to give the firm access to new product markets, or sometimes it will be to access other labour markets. Certainly small firms have significant problems overcoming the perception that they are volatile, and as a result, employees are disinclined to move house to join them. So having staff dispersed is a common solution, with employees travelling to the headquarters for various lengths of time. This also describes the firm that makes use of services of external others, where the staff comprises a mix of employees and suppliers. Here the manager must make distinct efforts to exert their influence. Meetings must be set and electronic means used to enable communications. Trust becomes more dependent on action, and timescales will be strained as interaction potentially becomes less frequent. Following the COVID pandemic and subsequent return to work, many firms found themselves questioning previous rigidity. Firms that previously insisted that the only way was for them to have a nuclear firm have acknowledged that employees wish flexibility. Hybrid structures are now often being trialled with employees working in headquarters on some days and at home on others. Hybrid working is nothing new, but it may become more mainstream in years to come as firms realise it can work and allow significant benefits. Distributed firms come about as the nuclear firm finds the need to open offices that are geographically separated from the headquarters. Here, typically, a manager runs each outpost, with another more senior manager coordinating the inter-outpost activities. Here, the central manager must set up communications and inter-outpost interaction to achieve the desired outcomes. It's easy for each outpost to become an isolated nuclear firm, following its local manager without harmonization behind a common strategy. So, let's have a reflection about the structure of your firm. Considering your firm, how do you see it evolving through the different structures? Remember that all manner of hybrid forms are also possible. So how will you go about enabling communication and interaction between you as a manager and each employee, and between the employees? And how will you ensure that communications are frequent and fluid in future evolved structures? Section 1.6, Extending Business to the International. Many firms serve their own locale, but many find that there's demand for their goods and services from further afield, and even internationally. And many will also find that there is value in extending the dispersed firm or distributed firm to include employees or suppliers located in other countries. This section discusses some of the issues in exporting and in contracting foreign employees, at least insofar as these activities affect the manager and their ability to manage people. Typically, selling goods and services abroad involves employees travelling to foreign lands to meet with would-be customers and clients. In a global, connected world, this is natural, but it does add another dimension to the firm. Firstly, employees must be prepared to travel. This brings complexities. Employees must know that they have the firm's support abroad, and specifically that they are supported financially. They must also know that they will be safe while travelling and experience no more risk than they would if living and working in the UK. Firms must deliberately organise themselves to export and to support employees abroad. Secondly, employees must have the skills and knowledge to do business abroad. This necessity is extensive, spanning language, culture, business practices, business law, and local needs. We do have the advantage that English is the common language of the business world, but this tends to make us think that everybody thinks the way we do. Anyone intending to do business abroad must dump this assumption and be prepared to learn about other nations. Given that employees need new skills and knowledge, this must be part of employee development plans. Now, many firms will consider it advantageous to contract with people living abroad for the supply of services, either as employees or as suppliers. Employees pick up the employment legislation of the country in which they live and work. So, for example, someone living and working in Israel for a UK firm cannot enter an employment contract made under English law. They would naturally be employed under Israeli law, albeit with no local employer. And you'll instantly see the possibility for complexity at this point. There are two popular methods for gaining the services of foreign workers. The first method is to open a branch office in the worker's country. This is an extension of the UK firm in the country, registered locally as a legal entity. The employee is then employed under the laws of their country. The second method is for the worker to become a supplier, forming themselves as a sole trader. The authorities in many countries permit this. In this case, they are employed locally in their own enterprise, which enters a business-to-business contract with the firm. Engaging the services of foreign workers is complex, and we discuss it some more later. Extending business to the international adds significant complexity, though the benefits can be considerable. Our advice is simple: get help from specialists. Section 1.7, Building Strategy. Strategy is a set of guiding principles that give reason for the activities of the firm. Strategy exists at every level and with every manager. No manager is without strategy. It's just that often strategy is formed by assumptions, biases and hunches, and is in the manager's head rather than written down. A firm's strategy should be considered, debated between interested parties, and written. But there's no prescriptive form that a strategy should take. At its simplest, strategy is a purpose that guides everyone in the firm in their everyday work and decision making. This purpose guides managers and employees towards some eventual improved state. Strategy should address the customer or the client problem. And here's a neat way from Richard Rumelt to state a firm's strategy. Because A has a problem with B, we, the firm, reckon that if we do C to D, we'll achieve outcome E. Now here's an example of a simple strategy for some kids wanting to earn some pocket money. Because the old folk in the houses at the end of the road, A, have problems cutting their lawns, B, we reckon that if we buy a lawnmower, C, and find where we can dump the cuttings, C, and then knock on the old folks' doors, C and D, to offer our lawn cutting services, C, we'll earn £50 a week between us, E. The problem, A and B, is stated from the customer's or client's perspective. C and D tell us the offering to the market, and E tells us the outcome expected. Another way of expressing strategy is to use the headings of who, what, why, where, when, and how, often called the 5 W's and an H. It's the same sort of thing as A, B, C, D, and E above. The kids' example above first defines why the kids are going into business, because they reckon they can make money from the old folks' problem by offering them a service. Sometimes managers are less blunt than simply expressing the idea of making money, but in a commercial firm, everything boils down to that. Who then defines the company needed? What are the products and services to be offered? Where is the geography, and when is the time plan for the project? And how the values of the firm and more detail on the plan. Whilst the strategy statement above is neat and complete, it's seldom enough to describe all that the firm will do to meet the manager's desired outcomes. It's not enough to guide the firm from inception to eventual sale or other endpoint. In 1996, two academics or consultants, Robert Kaplan and David Norton, developed the balanced scorecard. The idea behind the balanced scorecard is that for a given strategy statement, there are 4 domains on which managers should focus. These concern finances, customers, processes, and people. The people domain centers on employee development. And this is shown in the book in figure 1.5 as a balanced scorecard. The idea is to follow on from the simple method we described above by saying, if that's the financial objective, E in our example, as the desired outcome, then here are the customers, processes, and people action that will be needed to achieve that. The customer objective is akin to C, and the processes to D. The people in need of development are, of course, the kids, who would have to go and learn how to cut grass. The other boxes on the grid give space to record the measures of the objective, how you'll know for each objective when you've got there, and chart the achievements through time. So we could go on. Once a basic strategy is in place, it can be elaborated. Elaboration might use a balanced scorecard to define a complete statement of what's to be done and what outcomes are expected. Then it's just a matter of doing it. Strategy gives the firm a reason for its existence. It's a set of guiding principles that the manager believes will enable them to achieve those attractive outcomes and will sustain this state over a chosen period. The manager should consult widely in developing the strategy with the board, the employees, and the customers. But it's not a straitjacket, and the strategy should remain under constant review, considering changing situation in the markets and in the competitive and regulatory environment. Some managers value flexibility over what they argue is the straitjacket of strategy. They insist that their firm's future lies in nimbleness, being able to grasp opportunity. That itself is a strategy. We would argue that it's a shallow strategy, since the ability to grasp opportunity is predicated upon being prepared. And if you'll remember, as the hyenas quipped sarcastically when Scar sang "Be Prepared" in Disney's Lion King, the quip was, "Yeah, we'll be prepared." For what? Being prepared itself demands financial, customer, process, and development plans and action. But most of all, strategy should guide managers and employees day by day in their activities. It's the mechanism by which the manager delegates. Without strategy, those guiding principles, all management action is difficult. If shareholders and their directors can't say what they want from a business, the managing director can't make plans, assess progress, and report if they've succeeded. And yet it's surprising how few firms have a sound strategy that is communicated across the managers and employees. Strategy influences the jobs that employees do, their motivation, the leadership that managers provide, employee performance, and ultimately those desirable outcomes. Strategy must pervade the firm. Without it, the manager is failing to plan and hence planning to fail. So let's just have a moment to reflect about your firm's strategy. Take a few minutes to develop the sentence involving A, B, C, D, and E for your firm. Then expand it and build the relevant objectives in a balanced scorecard. Develop multiple objectives and measures. And how then ultimately will you communicate the strategy? And do you think it will be well accepted? And is it realizable? Section 1.8. A system that does something. Earlier we described the firm as a machine. It's time now to expand that simple model to see each of the machine's component parts. And of course, many of the parts won't be in place yet, so we can't see all the parts. To expand the simple model to something more complex so that we can start developing plans, we need a more elaborate model. For this, we need to consider the machine in its context as a system. A system is a set of components connected for some purpose. The purpose is defined in the strategy, and this can be expanded to give a fuller definition, stating that in three parts. First, the system is an assembly of components, each comprising human competence and technology function, connected in an organized way as a process that will achieve the desirable outcomes. And second, each component is affected by being in the system, even if only because it participates in the system. And the behavior of the system is changed if any component leaves or fails to perform as intended. And third and finally, the assembly of components, the system, has been identified as being of particular interest to someone, the shareholders, but also to all stakeholders, including employees and customers or clients who benefit from its existence. There are many approaches to elaborating the model. The most useful here is a method of analysis and synthesis developed by the authors from Systems Dynamics, an approach to looking at organizations. And this was developed initially by Jay Forrester of MIT's Sloan School of Management. And we here call the method systems modeling. Systems modeling first requires the manager to identify the concepts of the firm. A concept is an idea. It may be something physical, it may be a process, it may be something conceptual. Either way, as a component, each concept is essential to making the system work. The system is a complete firm in its context of market and industry. Systems modeling can be best illustrated by example, and we show this in Figure 1.6 in the book, and I'll describe it here. Each label is a concept, like profit or order intake. The network of connected concepts is the system. It can be as complex or as simple as the person creating it wants to be. The level of detail is determined by the purpose to which the model is put. The arrows, and there are arrows chasing from one concept to another, indicate dependence or influence. So in the example, profit leads to investment, or in the reverse, investment is caused by profit. And this form of linkage continues throughout the model. Of course, causality is difficult in a firm because there's so many variables. Each concept elaborates the what of a simple strategy. Each is defined by an element of the 4 domains of the balanced scorecard. Production, for example, will be defined financially in terms of customer or client satisfaction, in terms of process, and in terms of people and their developmental needs. Once the concept model is built, it can be reviewed for its accuracy, completeness, and overall ability to achieve the desirable outcomes were such a firm to be created. Change is depicted by the difference between what the firm is today and what it might be tomorrow. Strategy is all about envisioning some improved state that the manager will make happen. The balanced scorecard, in the case of that we described, is all about describing what's needed to bridge the gap. Systems models can be built depicting these 2 states. If the change is small and the differences are to occur within the same systems model, they can be described by focusing within a function. An example might be moving product design to become in-house. Many changes in growing a business will require fundamental changes to the systems model itself, perhaps introducing product design for the first time, or ditching implementation, and we show implementation as one of the concepts. Ditching implementation by designing products that are delivered straight to the customer, thereby not needing that particular concept. The important point about modeling the firm is that each concept comprises people and technology. Some concepts may be completed mostly by technology, working with minimal input from employees. Others will be completed mainly by people, working with minimal technology. As manager, you must determine what these components are, and you must determine what technology function and what employee competencies and behaviors are needed for success. Section 1.9, Money as the central measure. As the saying goes, money makes the world go round. We can fight the thought that all that matters is money, but we can never disagree that it's the universal common denominator in business. Even in charities and in not-for-profit organizations, money is the universal measure to value their efforts, measuring each charity's impact. Of course, just because money is the universal measure does not mean it's the most important, nor even the most used within the firm. As organizational psychologists and human resource specialists, we'd argue that it's the people that matter most. But starting with profit, the following section discusses the most significant financial metrics in many firms. Profit first is the surplus available from the firm once all operating costs and costs of goods sold have been deducted from the sales value. As is often mentioned in Star Wars, the Force is strong with him or her, and so it is with most managers. They aim to make profit by maximizing sales and controlling costs, and that underlying drive is strong and unrelenting. That's not to suggest there's anything wrong with profit, far from it. Profit enables many things, like employment of more people, payments of bonuses as a reward for loyalty, and sponsoring of employees' personal development. And of course, it enables payment of dividend as a return on the investment to those shareholders who, at their own risk, put up the money to start the firm in the first place. Because profit enables so much, that drive for profit must be respected. There are 2 types of profit, normal profit and supernormal profit. We say that a firm makes normal profit when it realizes earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, commonly referred to by its acronym EBITDA, of about 10%, the return that an investor might expect to earn if the money was instead invested in the stock market. A firm, on the other hand, makes supernormal profit if the firm realizes more than normal profit. Some firms make colossal profit, up to, say, 50%. Supernormal profit depends a lot on the products and the services sold and the market in which the firm trades. Realizing supernormal profit normally indicates that the firm has a unique idea that is highly valued by customers, enabling it to charge a premium for its goods and services. But normal is normal for a reason, and that's where most firms operate. People surrender their personal freedoms in return for a regular wage or salary. They agree to be told what to do by the manager and become what is legally termed an employee, because the manager, as agent for the shareholders and directors, gives the employee earnings security. Pay, then, is an important point that pervades the whole manager-employee relationship, and it differentiates employees and suppliers. A supplier is a free man or woman. An employee is a wage slave. At least in free societies, both have made their choice willingly. Pay is determined in a negotiation between employee and manager, tempered by the labour market and the market price for the job. Pay is contentious. Paying more does not make employees work harder, but inadequate pay and unfair pay decisions are responsible for much disquiet in firms. Pay is the single most significant factor in why employees decide to quit. Turning to pensions, the cost of keeping the elderly is rising. To reduce the burden on the state, the payments of an amount linked to a percentage of an employee's salary must now be made to a private pension for them. This amounts to a few percent of each employee's salary. Pensions are, however, part of the manager's ability to differentiate their firm from others and attract and retain good employees. And some occupations and parts of the labour market have established norms where firms pay anything up to 20% of salary into private pensions. Some demand that the employee matches the firm's payment. You, as manager, will need to decide on your attitude towards pensions. Like pensions, benefits have established normative levels for occupations in specific parts of the labour market. It's typical now for the firm to fund a growing range of benefits such as private medical treatment, long-term illness insurance, gym membership, and even cycle purchase. While many managers are inclined to consider benefits as a cost and a necessary evil, benefits must also work for the firm. For example, private medical insurance reduces long-term sickness absence, and gym membership increases the overall employee well-being. When considering benefits, we recommend that managers focus on those that will be popular with employees, but those that will bring tangible benefit to the firm too. Under strategy and the balanced scorecard, the people contribution was headed development, indicating the ability to achieve financial objectives through the training and development of people. Now, development and training differ. Training is the formal change in competencies and behaviours through planned learning. Development is everything else that drives change through people taking up new roles and responsibilities. Training and development ensure that the firm stays ahead of its competitors. Many managers think of training as a cost, and this is a short-term view. Training and development is an investment. The manager pays out today in the hope of a return on their investment tomorrow. There are various norms quoted for training and development, but it would not be unreasonable for managers to pay 10% of the sales value to train and retrain their employees. We discuss training and development in more depth later in the book. In terms of return on investment, the payback must be assessed considering the counterfactual. What would have happened if employees had not been trained? If they'd not been encouraged to develop by taking on new roles and responsibilities? And that's often difficult to quantify. And then finally, there are taxes. The firm must behave as the government's tax collector, but that's not something that we would wish to centre on here because generally taxes are a levy rather than anything that the manager can particularly do something about. Section 1.10. Instructing people to do work. Communicating in English is ambiguous, and that is true even when the manager does communicate effectively. Instructing people to do work and communicating how the work is to be done is one of the biggest problems in firms. Good communication centres on clarity of information and confirmation that the instruction has been received and understood and will be acted on. As we outlined, though, people start their relationship with the firm as suppliers, trading at arm's length. As the firm grows, those suppliers metaphorically come indoors and join the firm as employees. In so doing, they surrender their rights in return for a wage and allow the manager to instruct them in what to do. But what is it that the manager can tell the employee to do, and how might this be done? Well, the simplest form of instruction is the verbal order. Please do this. In instructing an employee, the manager must take care that what they ask is lawful, decent, socially acceptable, and within the employee's competencies. Provided that the instruction is within the scope of what the employee signed up to do, the manager can pretty much expect their instruction to be complied with to the best of the employee's ability. Most firms develop beyond the manager issuing verbal instructions throughout the day. Most move to a document-based operating system, and our Figure 1.7 in the book illustrates the sort of approach. Typically, the manager, as agent for the shareholders and directors, and hence the firm, enters a contract with a client. This is usually done by making an offer, perhaps in a quotation. The customer accepts the offer by placing an order. There may be a written contract, but whether it's verbal or written, an agreement for supply will be made. Someone in the firm must then translate the contract into something actionable by the employees. And this is shown in the book in Figure 1.7 by a dark arrow, illustrating that that's the central path. Often this is done through documents like statement of work, method statement, or standard operating procedure. These centre on a common understanding of a specification. In a building firm, these might be replaced by drawings showing the building to be constructed. In a cafe, there might not be any documents, but instruction might be given through on-the-job training, with the manager translating the specification to the employee. One way or another, the manager must communicate what's needed. As we note, the employee has entered an employment contract with the firm. Universally, the employee is considered weak and the manager, as employee, powerful. The result is that much of this contract is now set in statute. Nonetheless, there is a contract under which the manager can expect their instruction to be heeded. The employee has an important job. They must work to gain the customer's acceptance that the specification has been complied with. If they can't or won't do that, the contract can't be determined, and a breach of contract between the customer and the firm will result, even if that only means the return of goods for a refund. The expected behaviour is set down in documents like policies, procedures of the firm, and the employee's job description. If the employee's behaviour is not as expected, there are grievance and disciplinary procedures built into the employment contract and described in the policies and procedures. So the employee is instructed to carry out work as set out in the instructions. It's often expected that the manager will develop their system as a set of procedures. But as we noted, these procedures will be carried out part in technology, part by the employee demonstrating their competencies and behaviours. But there is a natural trade-off between written processes and procedures describing what's to be done and employee training. The degree to which one or other dominates depends on the job. Examples of procedures abound. Even surgeons talk of procedures. Airline pilots have procedures, and it's only when conditions become extreme that they revert to what they learned in training. The balance between procedures and training has a lot to do with employee satisfaction. Certainly, the more the person uses their training, the more satisfied they will likely be. So let's just pause at that point for reflection. And it's about instructing employees in your firm. Considering your firm, how will you instruct your employees to do what you need them to? Will you lean towards written procedures or towards training? What role will your employees have in securing customer or client acceptance of the goods and services that you deliver? And remember, it's your employees that normally interface with your customers. Section 1.11. Common mistakes that managers make. We've talked a lot about training, but unfortunately less than 20% of all managers in the UK have been trained to do the management job. The result is that they make a lot of mistakes, and it's worth highlighting some of these here. Many advisors say that managers should work on the firm and not in the firm. By this they mean that the firm should be a project, starting with inception and ending with sale or other end game. And they argue that to do this, the manager must retain an objectivity that getting stuck in doing the work does not permit. The result is that many managers stay back, detached, avoiding getting close to their employees. One good example of detachment behavior is the manager of an 8-man personal training firm. She's ceased her own work as a personal trainer and now spends her day on spreadsheets, marketing and networking. She rarely sees her trainers working and seldom interfaces with her customers. Another is the MD of a 100-man surveying firm who is still a major fee earner, returning a ratio of billable hours to total hours worked of 85%. He simply has no time to get involved and spends his days out of the office on expert witness work. By being detached, albeit in different ways, these managers have lost touch with their employees, with the work done, and with the customers and clients. They risk losing their businesses. All managers must stay involved with just the right detachment to enable objectivity whilst influencing their followers. Working on the firm, not in it, should be a metaphor for objectivity, not practiced literally. Managers must be experts in the trade of the business and be expert managers. In the UK, we're happy to let our businesses be managed by accountants and professional managers and others who have little or no competence in the business. And this was brought into stark relief in the National Health Service in the 1990s and 2000s, where departments were headed by managers with no clinical ability. The result was caricatured in TV serials like the BBC's Casualty, where ignorant managers were pitched against hero clinicians. Slowly this is being corrected as nurse managers take over wards and surgeons are becoming hospital CEOs. Fundamentally, the manager must understand the firm, its processes, its customers and clients. They must be very good generalists in all technical aspects of the work. Then they must train as managers. It's interesting that in Germany, the country with the highest productivity in Europe, managing directors are generally technical specialists who have retrained for their new role. In Germany, promoting a management generalist or an accountant to be MD is anathema. A sole trader does everything that there is to do in a firm. They are alone. As soon as an employee is hired, the sole trader becomes manager and must delegate. Delegating is not just getting somebody else to do the menial bits of the work that the manager is well rid of. It's the passing to a trusted colleague of complete work packages for which that colleague takes responsibility. With responsibility comes freedom to act to secure success. Managers must never micromanage, delegating, but interfering incessantly to direct the work. Now that said, all delegation must be within the employee's scope of work defined in their job description. Of course, all job descriptions should include the all-encompassing phrase that the job holder may also be asked to do other things from time to time within their competencies. So delegation can be wide, but only within the employee's competencies. Many managers pass over menial work but retain control of success or failure. The result is that the employee motivation is less than it could be. Similarly, many managers think they delegate, but they don't monitor progress. With delegation comes a strict set of conditions. The employee should have the freedom to act, but only if they report progress and seek help if needed. Delegation is to be learned by the manager. And trust but verify is a Russian proverb used by President Ronald Reagan of the US when talking about nuclear disarmament. It became the motto of the United States Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Trust but verify should likewise be the manager's motto when delegating work of any kind to any employee or group of employees. In the end, the buck stops with the manager, so the manager must verify that the work is progressing to schedule and that costs are under control and as predicted. But many employees will tell a promising story. It's for the manager to trust the employees, but take such steps that might be needed to confirm the stories that they're told, without overtly letting the employee know that they're checking, thereby breaching trust. Many managers pass over work and projects and then are very disappointed when things drift and costs escalate. They trust blindly. Remember that you, as manager, know a lot more than your employees do about the business. Delegation is about motivating, and hence you must delegate, but you must always delegate under control. And then finally, many of the decisions a manager must take are unpleasant. The manager must steel themselves to tell an employee that they've done a poor job. Making someone redundant, for example, is challenging, and facing up to an employee who is aggressive or loud may involve heightened personal threat. The result is that many managers fail to act in all those and similar cases, or fail to act immediately. Generally, if action is deferred, if the manager dithers, the moment is lost and the effect of what's said and the action taken by the manager is diluted. In the case of feedback, it's only effective as a motivator if given moments after the event. So let's just pause for reflection and just consider avoiding the common management mistakes. So take a few moments and identify any of these mistakes in your present behavior as a manager. What might you change now and how? Then, thinking about some of the managers you've known, identify at least one example of each of these mistakes. Again, think about how that manager might have behaved differently and what you think the resulting outcome might have been if they had. Section 1.12. Doing management. Management is not unidimensional. It's not about doing one thing that will result in one outcome, like profit. There are multiple desired outcomes to be achieved and sustained simultaneously. A firm, for example, needs high quality, turnover, and profit, and these can be achieved through the manager taking a huge combination of actions. Each action contributes to the end outcomes, or sometimes not. It's the interaction of these actions that realizes the outcome. This makes successful management hugely complex. As a result of this complexity, it's no surprise that managers abandon any thought of theory and resort to bumbling along, doing whatever their gut tells them at any time. The good news, though, is that all the action-outcome relationships obey laws. There are principles that can be learned. But before exploring those laws through the rest of the book, let's look at the overview. What is it that the manager is trying to do? Fundamentally, management is the intervention by the manager into the working lives of the employees to persuade them to do things that they might not have done otherwise. The manager must therefore get used to the idea of change, of continually sensing the outcomes, doing more of what's working, stopping doing what doesn't work, and launching new interventions in search of great things. And this is shown graphically in figure 1.8 in the book. Taking an action that starts improvement in outcome up the slope A on figure 1.8 is good. It's an action in the right direction. It might be something like introducing performance appraisals. People become focused, committed, because they welcome the interest shown in them by their manager. So the manager then deepens the appraisal action by linking each person's performance to their pay. That drives outcomes down the slope at B in the diagram, and you'll learn more about why this is later in the book. The manager can then either retrace their steps back to A, undoing what they've just done, or introduce some evolved bonus system that partially corrects for the previous misguided intervention. This then leads to a local maximum at C. While resting, rejoicing at C, the manager might consider that there's more to be had, so they launch a new initiative such as a restructure. Let's speculate that this results in hugely improved responsibility for all, resulting in improved motivation. The result is arrival with heightened outcomes at point D on the graph. The question for the manager is whether there's more to be had by striving for point F, if only they could see what F was, and whether, by upsetting what's now been achieved, the firm will come crashing down to the local minimum at E. Now, this is playing in two dimensions. It's a model, just a way of visualizing the effects in a complex world. In truth, the figure in the diagram, with its local minima and maxima, is in multiple dimensions. It's presented here to illustrate the lot of the manager as someone who is continually intervening in search of greater things. Sometimes what they do has a good result, and sometimes the variables will conspire to reduce the outcome. But the manager can never rest, since the environment around the firm is changing too, and evolution is fundamental. Management of a firm can be likened to the evolution of a species. The continual injection of management energy by the manager in the fashion depicted in the diagram and described previously is what might be termed the firm's DNA. The firm's DNA can be described at a high level using the McKinsey 7S model, first postulated by Tom Peters and Robert Waterman in the 1982 book In Search of Excellence. And they worked for a time for the McKinsey consulting firm. In the McKinsey 7S model, every aspect of the firm can be categorized under one of 7 headings. Conveniently, each starts with the letter S. In simple terms, the manager could write a sentence describing each S, and that would give a pretty good description of the firm's DNA. Taking the analogy a little further, the firm adjusts itself, its skills, staff, style, strategy, structure, systems, and culture, that's maybe not an S, to meet the needs of its stakeholders within its chosen environment. If there's a match between the firm and environment, the organism of the firm succeeds. If not, like Darwinian natural selection, that combination of DNA fails. But the environment is changing, and it's the manager's never-ending job to adjust the firm's DNA to optimize the match. Like evolution, no one knows if the present version of the organism, the firm, is the best that there could be. The evolution described in the figure 1.8 in the book could progress without any step change in outcomes. Perhaps the manager and shareholders in search of profit will be satisfied. Perhaps not. Sometimes managers can create a hugely changed DNA for the firm, which they believe from various modelling activities will give a step change in outcomes. We might liken this to a mutation in Darwinian evolution. If the mutation is better suited to the environment and more of the desired outcomes result, this version of the firm can be kept. Evolution then progresses as before, with the manager taking more incremental change to improve key performance indicators such as turnover, profit, quality, and safety. Peters and Waterman's book was well titled, In Search of Excellence. It perfectly describes the manager's lot, to use their competencies to search for optimized outcomes that might be described for their firm as the state of excellence. Of course, like nirvana and other desirable but unreachable states, excellence is never really achieved, but hopefully at least normal, if not supernormal, profits can be sustained over a long period. Section 1.13, Chapter Summary. Chapter 1 is an overview, setting the scene for the 11 chapters that follow. We define the manager of a firm as the person who takes responsibility for the actions of their employees in pursuit of agreed goals. The manager differs from other, perhaps more glamorous titles like entrepreneur and leader. The entrepreneur and leader are simply management roles. Generally, managers must be entrepreneurs and must lead. That distinction of manager as the person who elects to take responsibility is crucial to the firm's success. Some might say that accepting responsibility is all that's needed, because the skills and knowledge of management can then be learned on the job, and there's some truth in that. The manager is responsible for the creation and running of the firm. The firm converts inputs to outputs using processes. This idea of treating a firm as a system allows the complexity of the firm to be abstracted and hence simplified. Simplification without loss aids understanding. The system can then be measured for its ability to produce key performance metrics like turnover and profit, and to do so with effectiveness metrics like productivity. Since the manager creates the processes within the system, they can adjust those processes to optimize the desired outcomes. This gives rise to the central manager activity, intervention. The manager intervenes if they want change. The manager has an ever-growing intervention repertoire. It's then a question of choosing the right intervention to effect the right change. Employees work in the system of the firm with technology. The duality of employees and technology give the firm its capability. In intervening, the manager can elect to adjust the employees and their competencies and behavior, or can adjust the technology. In the beginning, firms start with an entrepreneur with a good idea. The entrepreneur produces goods and services for supply to the customer. There are then two key steps in the firm's growth. The first, when the entrepreneur subcontracts to others to supply goods and services, and the second, when the entrepreneur hires some employees to serve in producing the goods and services. Both enable growth. This distinction between supplier and employee is important, and many managers confuse the two. In this book, we drive a clear wedge between the two and focus on employees. As the firm grows and hires more employees, its structure becomes ever more important. Humans are social beings, and employees work together in social groups. This interaction aids the firm in achieving its goals, but it also is the source of much of the manager's worries. The firm's goals are defined in its strategy. A strategy is a statement of what the manager and the employees will do to meet the goals. We define simple ideas about how to state a firm's strategy. Having said that systemizing the firm will simplify, the manager does need to elaborate to characterize the system components, its employees, and technology. We describe a method of concept modeling taken from the field of systems dynamics. Using concept modeling, we describe how the firm can be described and hence built. Management is about change, and hence change can be managed by modeling what is and what will be. The difference between the present and the intended state is the motivation for action. Following our declared positivist approach, we describe in this chapter how it is that the manager sets up their system, setting it running to achieve its aims, and we describe how the manager intervenes. Positivism is about establishing the dependencies between the variables, the links from employee competencies and behaviours to business outcomes, which portray the manager as an incessant intervener, knowing the links and adjusting to achieve the desired goal. Chapter 1 is an overview. In the following 11 chapters, we discuss how such interventions on the human resource of the firm are made to best effect. In those 11, we discuss a mix of management theory stemming from the science of psychology, the professions of law and economics, and from a modicum of politics too. Few managers are trained. Few managers get management right, so there's much to be learned. We hope that you read on and enjoy the learning experience.